Hey everybody, Greg Surratt here, and I hope you like a little blues music. Great way to start your morning. Anyway, we're just happy that you're here and excited to share together this morning a little bit of conversation about mental health and ministry. Now, I know that not everybody watching right now is a vocational minister, full-time in ministry. I realize that. I would make a theological point to say that if you're a believer, we're all in ministry of some kind. It's just some of us are vocational. And some of the things that we're going to talk about today will apply specifically for vocational ministry. But the truth is, we're all alike. And the things that we'll talk about are certainly applicable to whatever job that you have, wherever you are. We all deal with mental health issues. We all deal with boundaries. So there's going to be a lot of things that we'll talk about that may specifically apply to you, or they may not. But hopefully you'll be able to make your own application. And I think we all understand that. I also wanted to invite you, if I could, and I'm trying to see, well, this is a brand new deal for us where we're doing something new here, and I was going to invite you to our Worry-Free Wednesday. Here we go, right here. Be patient with me, technology. But anyway, Worry-Free Wednesday is something I do every Wednesday morning. I send a text with a video, just a short video that looks like this, only it's about 3 to 5 minutes. And we deal with just an encouragement and how we can have Worry-Free Wednesday. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a 12-week mental reset on Worry-Free Wednesday. And if you would like to get notification of that, just text worry, the word worry, that's all, the word worry, to 833-349-7516. Text worry to 833-349-7516, and you'll get a 3 to 5 minute video on Wednesday morning, and it's going to be a series. And so love to have you a part of that. And if you need to, you can do that now, or you can take a picture of the screen, text it just a little bit later, and we'll get you a video on that. Let me talk just a second about what we're going to do today, just a little bit of things that we need to kind of talk to you about how you can participate. First of all, we are streaming live right now to several different venues. If you are on the live Zoom recording, we want your questions. We want you to participate. So there's a Q&A button, and if you have questions at any point during our time together, we'd love for you to just let us know what they are, and we'll try to monitor those as best we can. And if you are watching from a Facebook page, just put it in the comments. Maybe put a Q in front of it so that we'll know it's a question, and we'll try to get to it, most of them if we can. If the technology works right for us, we've got some folks helping us with that. Also put comments, and some people have asked me if we're not able to be live right now. Or I know somebody texted me this morning, said, I want my whole staff to see this. We are recording it, and it will live on our Pastors Collective YouTube site. And we'll get that up in the next day or so, and I'll get you information on that. But this will be recorded, and it will be on our Pastors Collective YouTube site. I think that's everything I wanted to say. So I am going to today welcome my friend, Chip Judd. Hey, Chip, good to see you this morning. How you
Yeah,
doing?
man, good to be here.
You doing all right?
I am doing really well. Thank you.
Good.
Really well.
Well,
Yeah.
give us a little update. I know a lot of us are aware of the fact that you have recently gone through a major surgery,
Yeah.
and tell us how you're doing and a little bit about that.
Yeah. Uh, 4 months post double lung transplant. Quite an ordeal. I'm doing great. I mean, I'm taking a lot of medications, so there's side effects we're trying to kind of manage and whatever, but steady improvement. Um, it's going to be probably another 6 months of challenge, just fighting, preventing rejection or infection. And but I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great.
Well, I am happy for that. I know that you're
Yeah,
quarantined a little bit. You and I generally connect at least once or twice a week and go to lunch, and
yeah,
now it's been a little bit less frequent. We've had to do it outdoors and some of that
yeah,
so that your body can recover from all of that. But we're glad that you're doing well. So you and I wrote a book together called
yeah,
The Endurance Factor. How ministry leaders can avoid burnout, live well, finish strong. One of the great books ever written. Would you agree with that?
I'm surprised you said one of the great. Whatever. You're just being a little bit humble,
Yeah,
falsely humble.
maybe that's the case. Why did we write the book? What was the motivation for that? What do you think?
I think we were just two old guys sitting at lunch one day and thinking about all the things that could have gone wrong that didn't go wrong in our lives. And we're kind of sitting there thinking, I'm doing better at this stage of my life than I expected to be, is what I feel. And I think we just thought, we ought to share some of what we feel like got us here. And I think we just kind of slowly but surely, and I think somebody approached you about it with an idea, and you asked me to get on board with you. And we just kind of wanted to share, not necessarily from a therapeutic side, although there's probably a little bit of that in there, but just kind of what are some of the things you got to look out for if you want to live well and finish strong?
Yeah, and I was approached by a publisher, and I said, I don't want to write a book. I know how hard that is. I've written two or three before. Uh, but I asked if you could be a co-author because I really do feel like, and I know a lot of other pastors who have interacted with you and just everyday normal folks, um, that you have some things inside of you that have been so helpful to me personally. Do you remember the
I'm
first time
grateful.
that I got some counseling from you, Chip Mac Lake, who's better known as Brandon Lake's dad? I'm now Josh and Jason Surratt's dad, but he's Brandon's dad, and he brought you in for just a kind of a consulting thing for Seacoast, and one of the things where everybody on the executive team would get, I think, an hour with you for personal
Yeah,
counseling. And
yeah,
I had never been to a counselor in my life. And it just freaked me out. I remember going home and telling Deb, I'm going to have to make some stuff up. I really don't know, what to do. And so I came in, and what happened, Chip? You remember that?
yeah. I mean, I didn't know the backstory that now I know, where your head was at.
Yeah.
But I could tell you were kind of nervous, kind of like you didn't know what to do. And I was nervous. I mean, I pastored a small church an hour up the road. You're kind of a big deal, so I was a little bit nervous.
Yeah.
And but the Lord had given me a word for you. And So I don't know, we small talked for a minute. And then I said, Greg, I feel like the Lord's giving me a word for you. You mind if I share it? And you kind of like tentatively said, well, sure. And the word was that you can't build tomorrow's church, but you can build the leaders who build tomorrow's church.
Yeah.
And what I gather from further conversations, you had kind of already sensed that, but didn't have words for it, I think.
Yeah.
And then eventually we got into, some of your issues. And by the way, Greg, you don't need to tell people you had never been to counseling. It was quite obvious.
I think you told me that it was a resource-rich environment for counseling in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to pick a target because there were so many.
Right, right. And I remember the word, and at first it kind of set me back
Yeah, it did.
because you said you're not the guy to build the church for the next generation. It was kind of like when God said to David, "You're not the guy.
Yeah,
You can't do it." And yet I knew in my heart that that was true, and that God would allow me to help prepare the way for next
yeah,
generation. And
right.
it's been great, and our relationship has been one of the highlights of my life. And what I want to do is I want to talk just a little bit today about the reality of mental health in ministry, um, burnout in ministry. We'll talk about boundaries. We'll probably talk about a lot of things that we haven't discussed. That's generally what we do. But this is a conversation that maybe couldn't have happened 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about why in a few minutes. But Chip, what patterns have you seen in leaders who struggle with burnout? What can we look for?
Yeah,
What are some signs of burnout in leaders, specifically in
yeah.
pastors?
The biggest thing I'd say, Greg, is most of the time leaders wait too long and too late to ask for help.
Hmm.
Um, it's kind of like any health issue. If you catch it earlier, it's easier to deal with. And I would say the signs are typically you can't find the off button, like it's your day off, or like you go on vacation. And here's a good little thought for you. How many days, not hours, but days does it take for you to really wind down and be present with your family on vacation? And most of us, I would say, if we're in the thick of things, it's probably 2 days, 3 days. Some guys would say never.
Mm.
They don't know how to shut it off. So kind of losing track of the off button is important. Um, if you get, concentration could be an issue when you're further along than you should be. In other words, you should have asked for help before this. You're going to start noticing physical things. Unfortunately, or whatever, Greg, I can share from personal experience. I had my crash. Now it's probably been 10, 11 years ago. And it was really just the stress of I was still traveling on staff at Seacoast and loving what I do. Just crazy. I love what I get to do. But here's the thing I learned. The brain doesn't distinguish between good stress and bad stress.
Hmm.
Interprets either one the same way.
So what?
So
Stop there just a second and finish that thought. But what's good stress? I mean, there is good stress. I thought
yeah,
all
like
stress was bad.
yeah, good stress is, you're playing golf and you want to make a good shot. You're playing tennis and you're intense. You're playing volleyball and you want to win. You watch a shoot 'em up action movie and you get your adrenaline. Anytime you get adrenaline flowing, that is by definition stress.
Hmm.
Well, adrenaline flows when you're having fun. And what happens, I'll just go here for a second because I found this really helps leaders when they get this physiological understanding. What I learned in my crash, Greg, is God designed you where you engage adrenaline to deal with a challenge,
Hmm.
but you're designed to come back down off the adrenaline train and it needs to flush out of your system.
Hmm.
Well, here's the problem. Depending on how practiced you are and how chronic the stress is, determines how long it takes for you to flush that adrenaline. Well, I'd gotten to a point where I just wasn't flushing. I would slow down just a little bit for my off days, but here's the key. In my head, I wasn't I wasn't turning off.
Mm.
Out here, you would think I was, but in my head I wasn't. So what was happening is I get adrenalized and I come down a little bit, but I don't go down far enough to flush it out. And what happens is eventually is adrenaline is your fight flight stuff. Well, eventually what happens is your fight flight switch gets stuck on
Hmm.
and everything feels like an emergency. Everything. Your wife says, "Hey, baby, would you take out the trash?" And you're like, why are you asking me? You might not say it, but you're thinking it. And what happens is you stay in this hyper engaged, alert place. And here's where then you get into cortisol and some of those kind of things. And it's probably not the perfect word, but they're corrosive to your pain management system, your immune system, and your emotion management system. So you start having issues in all three of those areas.
I was just thinking as you were talking about that, I imagine there are folks listening right now that go, that's me. That's kind of where I am.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit later in our time together about maybe some steps out and what you can do. You talked about your crash. I think you were getting ready to preach on a weekend and
Yeah. Yeah.
added stress to, being on
Yeah.
staff. You've come from a smaller church. You'd already been
Yeah.
traveling, because when, especially as a counselor type, when people figure out that this is somebody, and this can be pastors, it can be leaders of any kind, but when people figure out, hey, you're going to say something that's going to help my situation, and maybe my marriage is rough, or I'm just dealing with some things. There'll be a line out the door that wants to talk, and as you became well known among pastors, especially because they have difficulty finding people to talk to,
Yeah.
then the workload got bigger. Then you came on staff, and at first you counseled people in the church, and then we limited that to no. You're just here for the staff because that's going
Right.
to overload you, and then preaching responsibilities on the weekend, and so you had a crash. What did that look like for you?
Well, I mean, I love to preach. And, we do our run through on Thursday. And halfway through the run through, I could tell it wasn't working.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I finished it just so we could critique it and all that. And I think my adrenaline level had been way up for weeks. I think I'd been what I call a travel gauntlet. And again, I want to stress this over and over. I love what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I love to get up and preach. I love watching the lights come on in people. So there was no element of, oh, I don't want to do this or anything like that. I love it. But what happened is I hit a tipping point in my system. God had been trying to warn me, my wife had been trying to warn me, my body had been trying to warn me. And finally my system, my stress management system finally said, we're done. We're done.
Mm-hmm.
And you were gone. Josh was gone. I realized there was no one that could take over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And dude, when I got home, I was curled up in a fetal position, bawling my eyes out. And it was purely my adrenaline had depleted my serotonin, and for temporarily, I was incapable of snapping out of this downward cycle, horrible negative thoughts, classical, tingling in my arm, tightness in my chest. I mean, a classic panic attack. Um, it was horrible, dude. I mean, it was absolutely horrible.
So that what you're describing is when somebody maybe finally hits the wall,
Yeah,
and it won't be
yeah,
the same for all of us, but
no,
I know I had. Uh, I want to be careful here. I'm gonna talk about what happened to me early in ministry, but what I want to be careful about is not say that happened. I figured out how to get through it, and
right,
it's a level that you reach. Um, I think you go in and out of. I don't think you have to hit the wall all the time, but I think you go in and out of. And maybe it's because we get out of good, healthy habits. Maybe it's the stress of the work or whatever. But you're never free. Would you agree with me that you're never free from the potential of burnout? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think there are core foundational habits,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them are spiritual, some of them are just common sense, practical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's all the stuff that we talk about, having some people around you that know you well
Right.
enough to two things. One, notice, first of all, notice that you're kind of, like I know you so well, Greg. If you walked in the room 100 yards away from me, I can tell by your body language if you're doing okay.
Yeah, you're kind of creepy
And
to be around sometimes. You know what? So, of course, I'm kidding. I love that. I love having a relationship with somebody that knows me, that loves me, and that's
yeah,
not afraid to tell me the truth. And
yeah.
we'll get into
And
that.
that's the key.
Yeah, we'll get into
That's the
that a
key.
little bit later. But
Yeah.
I know.
They
Well, I know that.
Well, let me just finish the
Yeah, go
thought.
ahead.
They've got to be close enough to you to notice if you get off your game, and maybe even your schedule's accountable to somebody, your wife and someone else.
Hmm.
Um, and then they've got to be secure enough in themselves that they're going to talk to you about it.
Right.
They're going to pull you aside in private and say, "Hey, Greg, you you seem like you're kind of not doing what you said you're going to do. Like you said you were going to only travel this much, and if I'm hearing you correctly, you've been doing like about twice that."
Yeah.
And
Maybe we need to talk aside. Here's the deal too, and we'll get into some prescriptive stuff specifically a little bit later in our podcast here. But um, the let me talk to pastors a minute. The higher you get on the food chain, first of all, let's go back, and we just said, and I say it like this, that everybody needs to sit at least one table with a group of people who love you but are not impressed with you and are willing to tell you the truth. And that can be one person, it can be a group of people. But let's break that down just a minute. If you're a leader, especially if you're a pastor, your church is probably impressed with you. Even more, I remember when I first started in ministry and people would come up to me after a message and tell me how that impacted their life. And it was amazing to me because sometimes it had
yeah,
absolutely nothing to do with what I was saying, or sometimes it took it to another level. That's called the Holy Spirit. And what's dangerous, that's another conversation, is when you internalize that, get kind of a God complex on all that. But the point of it is that there are people around you that are impressed with you, and that's not a bad thing.
right.
I want to live a life that's honorable, but you've got to look for people who love you, they're for you, they're not impressed with you, and they're willing to tell you the truth. And the higher you get on the food chain, frankly, the more success that you have, the fewer people
Yeah,
there are. Would you agree with that? Who are willing to, and
absolutely.
also fewer people that are willing to, and we lose our ability to listen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I would even go so far as to say it this way, and I've had this experience happen many, many, many times. A leader say, "Oh, no, no, my guys, my leaders, they can say anything they want to me," and I've been there, long enough that I can be like, I'm like, "Dude, really? You really believe that?" And they say, "Yeah." And typically, I'll try to think of some way, the least offensively as possible, to prove that that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, um, here's the thing, the kind of the hierarchy thing. Um, you've got to continually give permission, invitation, and opportunity for that. And don't ever take it for granted, and don't ever believe it's a done deal for good. And you just, because they need you, man. They look to you probably as a little bit of a father figure,
Mm-hmm.
and you're meeting a need in their life for approval, connection, and professionally. Um, don't I would tell most leaders this: don't assume you have people around you that can speak the truth to you. Um, and often you need to bring somebody in from the outside that can do that
Yeah.
and is willing to do that.
Well, so we're talking about patterns of leaders who are in burnout or struggling with burnout, emotional exhaustion. They can never turn it off, but they're exhausted. Physical fatigue sometimes. That's why just a vacation doesn't do it. Sometimes we can go on a vacation and feel worse than when we came back because we don't turn it off. We don't deal with the issues. Loss of motivation, spiritual dryness. I know I've gone through times in my life where
Yeah.
I was just spiritually dry. Good things came out of one of them. We have a response time at Seacoast, which is kind of
Yeah.
unique to us, where at the end of the service, we do most of our worship at the end of the service rather than at the front end, and people respond, and it's characteristic of what we do. And that was birthed out of a burnout season for me when I
Uh,
felt dry. And the church actually was growing. I didn't know kind of where all that was, but there was a sense of spiritual dryness which could have taken me out, but instead God graciously used it to bring about some other things. Cynicism. um, you know uh, I get around guys that are really cynical sometimes. uh, Sometimes we think that's a gift of the Holy Spirit. I don't think it is. I think it's a gift of the devil. But we can be real cynical about what we're doing, other people's stuff, compare ourselves to that. Those are some signs of burnout. And why is it? It's not unique to pastors by any means. If you're a leader, or if you're everyday guy or girl in a job, you can have a burnout, especially if you're in the child rearing ages of between what 2 and about 8, or teenage years, or whatever. But why do you think burnout is so common among pastors and ministry leaders? Are what are why is it why are there so many that are experiencing burnout? Any ideas on that? I've got some ideas, but let me hear what you think.
yeah. I mean, I think there's kind of a vicious cycle that we get caught in. I mean, let's face it, a leader comes into leadership or ministry, pastoring, whatever, and they've got the same issues all of us do: childhood issues, parent issues, self awareness, self confidence, self esteem, self image, all that stuff. Well, you're in a profession that you got to figure out when and where and with whom you can share your struggles and let people in far enough to really do you some good.
Hmm.
So you got that whole piece of the puzzle, that it's hard to get safety. Now, some of it's on us that we are cynical and distrusting, but that's part of it. And then the other part is, um, you know, our insecurities translate into um, looking for ways to get a need met. I want people to respect me, think well of me. So we fall into comparison and competition. And you ask a pastor, typically, I think it's getting a little bit better, but not too far back. I would have said this was almost always the case. You ask a pastor how he's doing, and he automatically says how many and how much.
Yeah.
And it's because that's their identity so wrapped up in what they do and how they're doing. And so I think comparison and competition is a big one. Um,
What?
and just if you think about it, it's kind of a thread through the whole conversation. Just somewhere that you regularly go to process your own inner stuff.
Yeah.
Um, what's on the inside creates, shapes, and defines what's on the outside.
Yeah. And
And it,
internally, we obviously there can be sin issues. We all deal with that, but unrealistic expectations.
absolutely.
I hear that all the time. We do church planting with the Arc Network, and we do a great job, I think, with it. Pat ourselves on the back a little bit. We got a whole team that does it. But I'll hear. I recently went to an art conference, and you've got guys discouraged, guys and girls discouraged with the results. The first two things you talked about, numbers and finances, and there's this
Right.
expectation that by now we should have had this many people, or I should have been doing this, or whatever the metric is. And unrealistic expectations can lead to burnout. I like to say, if you're not meeting your expectations, lower them, okay? Get them down low
Yeah.
enough that you can jump over them and celebrate them. But one I deal with is perfectionism. I see it when I go to
Yeah.
church. I love attending Seacoast right now. I sit on the front row, all right, and cheer them on. I love it as part of what I do. But it's hard for me to enjoy a service because I'm this wasn't right. This needs to, that's just a
Right.
disease I think that some of us have.
Turn
Criticism,
this up, turn that
yeah,
down.
exactly. Criticism and conflict too are something that pastors deal with.
Yeah.
Somebody told me the other day, said if you have 100 members, you've got 100 critics or 100 bosses. And I don't think
Yeah.
that's true, but it feels like it sometimes. Sometimes you've got 3 or 4 really loud people that are even sometimes unaware uh, of their what they're doing, or they're just some mean people that in life, whether it's in job or church or whatever.
Yeah.
But criticism and conflict, you can get hurt a few times, and you don't open
Yeah.
up anymore, and then it can lead to there's just a lot of things.
But Greg,
Yeah,
let me just say something so I don't forget it. What you're touching on right there is a key because emotional struggles, things that get triggered in us, are they're buoys on the top of the water tied to an issue deep down inside of us. So when those buoys light up, like somebody's critical and it bothers you for days,
yeah,
that's God trying to tell you there's something down here you need to deal with
yeah.
because you shouldn't be giving people that much power.
That's so good. When you overreact to something, I
Absolutely.
remember I walked into a Starbucks several years ago, and it was between Christmas and New Year's. I always like that time of the year because nobody wants anything from me. They're all doing their own thing. We're pretty well shut down. Walked into a Starbucks, and a lady came up to me and said, "Hey, I had a dream that you were going to be here," which should have been a clear indicator to run. And
Yeah.
she asked me if she could talk, and I said sure. And she sat down and wanted me to forgive her for some stuff. I said, well, no problem. But as she went through her laundry list, it wasn't about her, it was about me. And she felt like it was a whole laundry list of things that were wrong with me. And then at the end, she
Yeah.
said, we're not going to come to your church anymore. We get fed more. Yeah, our family just gets fed better at this other place, which is like an arrow in your heart. But I went home and got so mad. In fact, I tell people that are close to me, I don't know if this is people that are close that are watching or listening. She asked me, can I pray for you about something? I said, yeah, pray for me about the fact that I want to give you the finger right now. That's terrible. A pastor should never feel that. And I went home and I was so mad, so furious, so mad. And then it started to point toward me because I'm a little bit of an introvert. And and it was my reaction was such an overreaction to what was said, done, or whatever, that it should have been a clear indicator that I was in trouble. And that actually was something that triggered some other things that led to a season of burnout in my own life. We could talk about this a lot. I want to. We need to get to some other things. Early warning signs are emotional exhaustion, cynicism, detachment, a loss of joy. You talked about I love doing what I'm doing, but I don't have any joy in it. Spiritual dryness. You've got some physical symptoms, maybe. Um, Difficulty with boundaries.
Mm.
You want to talk about that just a little bit, and then I want to move on to what we can do to really do better.
Yeah. Yeah. The key thing for me with boundaries is like when I hear the word boundaries, I think what I call the R word, which is responsibility. To me, the key, if you really, 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 really want to understand boundaries and come up with a really cool way to manage them, anytime you're in a situation that you question, is this a boundary thing? Ask yourself the question, am I responsible for the outcome? So somebody comes to you and they share their problems, and typically, maybe you would leave feeling responsible to solve their problem.
Hmm.
Now, here's the deal: the only way you're responsible to solve a problem is if you have the ability to determine the outcome. If you can determine the outcome, you're probably responsible. But if you can't determine the outcome, you are not responsible. So Greg comes to me, he's having a bad day. He kind of dumps on me, and then he walks away. And maybe he feels like he just made me responsible for his bad day. Well, inside myself, I'm saying, this is what I'm saying to myself. I hate Greg's having a bad day, but you know what? I was having a pretty good day before he talked to me. And I don't see any way that I can determine the outcome. In other words, help him have a good day. So you know what? It ain't my responsibility.
Hmm.
I'm going to go on and have a good day. And and that applies to a lot of things and it gets tricky for a pastor because you got a congregation that, scripture says you're going to give an account for their soul, but you got to be careful what that means. Um, can you make someone break out of a depression? Can you make a marriage get on track? No. Can you do your part? Like my thing's this: the 45, 50 minutes you're in front of me as a counselor, you are going to have my absolute undivided attention. I am going to be absolutely committed to helping you. The minute you walk out, I take no responsibility for you at all. None.
Mm.
I tell people occasionally, I don't have a prayer list with your name on it. Why? Why? Because it's a way I remind myself the only responsibility I have in your life is that hour we're together. Because if God wasn't helping you before you got in front of me, and he's not helping you after you leave, you're in a world of hurt. Because I can't do it for you. And now you got to think that through with a message. You do a message and you're under this pressure, I want to change lives. You got to think about how complicated it is to change a life.
Mm.
And all you got here was a life changer for me, Greg. When I realized, and I think you put it on one of your morning things recently. Here's the deal: if I just get you to first base, if my sermon just gets you to first, I don't need to hit a home run every time.
Yeah.
If I just get you to first base. But boundaries are tricky, but they're not complicated. It always starts with responsibility.
That's
Am I
good.
responsible? And you're only responsible for things you can control.
And when you take responsibility in an area that you don't have authority, then
Right.
that's called stress. And
Right.
that's true of every area of life. Well,
Right.
and one other thing, early warning sign is what might be called escapist behaviors. You have these
Yeah.
fantasies. I just would like to get in my car and drive away and never come back. And
Yeah.
I've had those. I mean, I'm telling you,
Yeah.
it's you're not above any of that. That's for sure. Well, what I want to
Yeah.
do is,
Greg, let me say
yeah,
something real
go
quick.
ahead.
Um, here's the thing. I say this to leaders, and it usually does not land well until we've had some time to process it together. But here's the deal, and I say this with all confidence, and forgive me that it's as strong a statement as it is. You determine the level of stress you live with. You do.
Hmm.
Oh no, it's pastoring, it's this, it's that. No, it isn't. You determine the level of stress you live with. Period. And by the goals you set. My Bible, I don't know about yours, but my Bible in red letters says, my yoke is easy.
Well, what
My
about, Chip?
burden.
What about if it doesn't feel like your yoke's easy? If it doesn't feel like what God's got you in is easy, what do you think about that?
Well, then you need to probably get some help figuring out where you're taking on things. Like the whole point of that is that's Jesus talking. If your yoke's not easy and your burden's not light, it didn't come from Jesus.
Ooh. Oh.
So you got to figure out what part of this burden and yoke is his and what part of it is self-generated that I'm putting on me.
All right. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take about a 5 minute break and we're going to come back at the other side of the break and we're going to talk about tools for living well and finishing strong. We've talked about what it looks like, but let's talk about some tools. And when I say break, what I want to do is I want to talk to you just a little bit about becoming a friend of Pastors Collective. Okay? So take a look at this and we'll be back as soon as it's done. Greg Surratt here with a thought on how you can be a friend to ministers. Ministry burnout is a real problem. but there is a solution. Research shows that pastors often struggle under the pressure of ministry. They can feel isolated, overwhelmed, unsupported. In fact, 75% of pastors struggle with personal relationships. 47% feel lonely and isolated. 33% have considered quitting ministry in the previous 12 months. Over 5,000 churches close each year, and over 500 pastors quit each month. The Pastors Collective is dedicated to helping ministry leaders live well and finish strong. Here's what we do. We come alongside pastors and we foster soul care. We curate a community. We develop resources on mental health in ministry. So, what's our solution to the current burnout crisis? There's three things. Number one are retreats. We believe that restoration begins with a hard reset of rest in a retreat setting. Our retreats are designed to help individuals relax, restore, and reconnect with God and a like-minded ministry leaders. We also believe that relationships are vital. Life-giving relationships that begin in the retreat are nurtured through ongoing cohorts, which are kind of like a small group that provides growth and learning and ongoing encouragement. And then the third piece of the puzzle are resources. Pastors Collective connects individuals to ministries and mental health professionals if needed, and other resources that we're developing and other people develop for continued healing and growth. So here's the question: is it working? Well, since opening our doors in 2021, we've served over 2,000 pastors and leaders in over 150 retreats. 51% of the participants say the retreat was life-changing. An additional 46% say it was very helpful. In fact, a pastor the other day said not only was it life-changing, but for him, it was life-saving. One pastor said, "I didn't know how much I needed this retreat until I arrived." Life and ministry can sneak up on you, and it isn't until you slow down that you realize how far off course that you can drift. He said, "This retreat has brought me back to my center." You know, here's what I think. I think every pastor needs what we offer at the retreat at Church Creek, but my passion is what my friend and co-founder of ARC, Billy Hornsby, called the little guy. They're the pastors of small churches that often can't afford to get the help they need. Billy challenged me on his deathbed to never forget about the little guy, and that's why I need your help. By becoming a friend of Pastors Collective, your monthly support will change lives, and I believe will turn the tide of pastoral burnout. Check out the incredible value of becoming a friend of Pastors Collective is for you and your staff and your church. For a gift of as small as $125 a month, you'll receive an invitation to a monthly Friends Forum with myself and other people, some of my friends involved in this same area of ministry. You'll also get a quarterly missions impact report that you can share with your church, quarterly testimony videos, and in addition to that, and probably most importantly, you'll be scholarshiping one pastor over a year's period of time to attend the retreat. For a gift of $200 a month, you get all of that, plus you sponsor two pastors who couldn't have afforded it otherwise. $500 a month sponsors 4 pastors. $1,500 a month sponsors 12 pastors. We even have churches that are becoming friends at $5,000 a month. They believe in it so much, and they're sponsoring as many as 40 pastors. Here's what's important. Will you help me today? Will you help me to build a generation of leaders who will live well and finish strong? I believe in this so strongly that I'm devoting the rest of my life to this cause. I want to help pastors be well so they can build well. If you'd like more information about how you can help, go to pastorscollective.com/friends. Again, that's pastorscollective.com/friends. See, friends don't let friends do ministry alone. And so let's stand with pastors and Christian leaders and let's change the story together. All right. We really would love you to join us. We need your help. And so if you can be a part of that, pastorscollective.com/friends, it'll tell you more about how you can be involved with what we're doing. Chip, I want to get into practical tools. But before we do, let's pick off a couple of questions if we can. Um, Matt says, how can you best determine what to say yes and no to in order to live well and build strong in every area of your life and ministry? How would you respond to that? How can you best determine what to say? Is there a grid, a matrix on what to say yes to and no to or to live well?
Wow. Um, yeah, the matrix I would say is, um, figure out what your assignment is, of course, your calling, your purpose, um, and filter through that, filter through. Um, but even as I'm talking, Greg, I start to think about the list. Here's the most important thing: you've got to have other people involved in the conversation. Your wife, your husband, whatever, and then maybe one or two friends. We're gonna probably, I'll probably say this sooner or later on the call here. Um, I I think every pastor, every leader should have a counselor they see no less than once a month.
Mm-hmm.
Um, coach, if the coach has some little teeny bit of counseling chops, not just a straight up performance coach, but somebody that can get into your head a little bit. But if you have that, because here's what makes you say yes to the wrong things and no to the wrong things. When you have misaligned ambition, when you have misaligned expectations, um, you say yes to an invitation because of you know it's going to bolster your ego, or you're going to get more followers on whatever, instead of, does it really further my mission and my calling? um, so the key to me is you got to have people around you that help you make sure you're, I hate to say it this way, but your motives are pure. And I don't mean it in the worst sense. I just mean that you're doing it for the right reason, to meet the right need. Um,
Yeah.
because it's tricky to figure out what to say yes and no to.
Let me
Uh,
let me tackle. Brandon has a question that's very very similar. And he says, as your church grows or grew or grows, how did you process and implement that you have to say no to people and set boundaries? Practically, you set a day off. You get calls or texts from people whose wife is leaving me and we need to meet with you, or husband wants a divorce. Can you please help us? It always seems to be an emergency at the time, and I try to set a day off or a boundary. Or people who approach you at church at the altar after a message, I have to meet with you. How do you guys navigate these requests? That's great. Let me talk to that just a little bit, because we all are there. We want to take care of people. In fact, it's an honor and a privilege to do what we do, to be called by God, to shepherd sheep, and to care for people. It really is. It's an honor and it's a privilege. I don't ever want to forget that. But if you don't handle it properly with proper boundaries, you're going to burn out and not help anybody. In fact, you're going to hurt people. One of the earlier questions says, what happens when the person who's supposed to take responsibility abdicates that role and causes church hurt, which usually is people hurt? How do we navigate that well? And that's a whole other question. Don't know whether we'll get to all of that. But the point is, if we don't do this part right, we'll hurt ourselves and we'll hurt people. One of the things that I did, and I learned it all the hard way, is that there are certain hours where I'm available. Okay, there are certain hours that I can't be available. I've got to be driven by a schedule, and I'm not a very scheduled guy, but I've learned to be driven by a schedule. If I've got to preach, there are certain hours that I've got to study for that. There needs to be time allotted to talk to people, to be open to some of that. There's time off. My day off is Friday, and I've told the church several times down through the years. I like to say, I love being your pastor. They'll say, well, we love being your sheep. It's kind of corny, but it's kind of cool, and we do that. And I'll say, I love being your pastor every day but Friday. Okay, Friday, I don't think about you. You're not on my prayer list, as Chip would say, because that's my day. That's my day to recover, renew, whatever. And so let's take those two instances. My wife's leaving me. I need to meet with you, or my husband wants a divorce. Can you please help us? That took a while to come to that point. Okay, and it feels like a crisis, and it is a crisis, but it's not an urgent crisis for me. In other words, we could talk about that on Saturday, or we could talk about it on Monday. It's still going to be the same. It's still going to be there. And people in crisis, or when they feel like they are, oftentimes they don't have boundaries. And it doesn't just take people in crisis. There are people that don't understand the concept of boundaries. You may be, you may have a father-in-law or a mother-in-law or a parent or a friend or whatever that doesn't understand boundaries, and so they are going to impose on yours all the time. And so you either got to let them do that, or you've got to set boundaries. And as a pastor,
Yeah.
I set boundaries. I say, Friday, I don't think about you. Now, if there's an emergency, it's my honor to serve you. Let me define an emergency. Somebody died. Somebody is dying, and will currently today. That's an emergency. I'll set it aside and deal with it in some way. But other than that, there's probably nothing that, and that might sound harsh, but it's not over the long haul. It's saying, I
Right.
want to be here. I'm not in a sprint. I'm in a marathon. Actually, I'm in a marathon relay, because I'm going to hand off what I do to somebody at some point. So I've got to stay healthy. So you've got to establish those boundaries. I don't go every night and deal with people's issues. Did I do that early on? Yes. Should I have? No. It's because I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to establish boundaries, and I won't go all into it. But I I I didn't wreck my marriage, but I came close, I think, just by not having healthy boundaries. And so my wife didn't feel cherished. I'd
Right.
be at home in a meal, somebody would call, hey, I've got to talk to you. Oh man, this is important. Let me talk to you. That type thing. And uh, it helped me when my wife said to me at one point, I remember coming home on an Easter, and it's the first time we'd had a certain number of people in our church. And I turned to her and I said, do you realize we had this many people in the church this week? And she said, well, that's your dream. It's certainly not mine. And when I said that, or when she said that, I thought, ooh, we have a problem here, and I didn't know we had one. That's
Yeah.
how clueless I was. And it took a couple of years really to reestablish trust on that. And it wasn't one event. It was that I didn't prioritize family, didn't prioritize her. I prioritized the needs that were out there. And that'll take you out. The needs are
Yeah.
real. And you've got to have ways to, you don't just avoid everything. But you do avoid everything on certain times unless there's an absolute critical emergency. Would you agree with that, Chip? Is that?
Yeah, I got a couple of thoughts. One is just a real simple phrase that is kind of sticky. Self-care is not selfish.
Mm,
Because here's the thing, and this really helps me. If you're coming to me for counseling and I'm a wreck, like I'm a wreck, I can't help you. Now, if I don't take care of me, I sure can't take care of you. So it's not selfish to have healthy boundaries. And you've already said it. I'll just say it slightly different or whatever. There's no such thing as an emergency except what you said, an unexpected death. People will say, oh, I've got an emergency. Well, it's been brewing for 10 years and you've been watching it. You've probably offered to help and they didn't want your help. But now that it's blown up in their face, they want you to take on their emergency. And I know that sounds rough, but I don't do it.
hmm
Um, being a counselor and a pastor, and used to have my own church, what Pastor Greg said, I would have blocks, counseling blocks, half a
hmm
day. I would have one Monday, let's say, and one Thursday, and whatever. And here's the deal: I can meet you Monday at 3 o'clock. Well, I can't meet on Monday. I need to meet on Tuesday. I'm sorry, I can't meet with you on Tuesday. Now
hmm
I could, but Tuesday was a staff planning, thinking, praying,
Right.
church focused day. And I found what was creating stress for me was what I call shifting gears.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be in church strategy mode and then have to go to a counseling session. That's a totally different mental and emotional gear. And it was wearing me out and I was less effective.
Yeah.
So I created, they call it compartmentalizing or time blocking. And and I was perfectly fine saying I can meet you Tuesday afternoon or Thursday morning. Well, I can't meet those two times. Well, I can give you some numbers and some other counselors.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but you're my
and
pastor.
yeah, there's, I know, and I want to get past this because we've just got a few minutes left and we want to get into some solutions that will be short, but um, buy the book. That's what you could do is the endurance
Yeah,
factor. Go on Amazon and we've got some real strategies in there. But, and by the way, the profits on that go to pastorscollective.com and to help with the mission. But yeah, I have an assistant, and she knows that these days, at this particular time block, is when I talk to people. And I also have what types of people are priority. And it's not like somebody's better than another. It's like this is probably where I can be most helpful. And then
right.
referrals to when I can't be as helpful as as I need to be. Let's move on. What are some tools, practical tools for living well and finishing strong? What daily or weekly practices have helped you, Chip, personally stay mentally healthy?
Right. Um, I mean, I would say without any hesitation, the most important thing I do, I do a message on it that I call one thing I do every day. One thing every day. And you could share on it, Greg, because you know what it
Mm-hmm.
is, and it made quite an impact on your life. But I would say it's the most important thing I've learned in almost 50 years walking with God. And that was, I call it R&R, and that was learning to receive and rest in the Father's love. And I won't get into all the theology of it, but I believe I believe in the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and I believe each of them brings a result or a an effect into our lives. And forgive me if that sounds weird to any of you, but I just found when Jesus brought me to the Father. I mean, my biggest emotional wounds were father stuff
Mm-hmm.
with my dad. He, called me lazy and never amount to anything. But when I learned that I have another father, I didn't get rid of my first one, my natural father, but I did switch voices, and I let my heavenly Father's voice whoever's words define you is your God. Whoever's words define you is your
That's
God.
good.
And I learned to let my heavenly Father's words define me. And here's the thing, man. If you don't learn to get your needs met by God, you're automatically going to look to some other source, person, thing, you know, whatever, power, pleasure, whatever. And my whole life changed when I learned to receive and rest in the Father's love.
Mm.
And I mean every day, every day. Start your day every day. Just sitting down 3 minutes, 5 minutes before you even do your prayer, as we typically call it. I would call this prayer, but and just practice receiving His love.
Yeah.
And I know I'm
Well, I
skipping a
just
lot of things there.
I want to add in as some of you know, I lost my brother 3 months ago. He died unexpectedly, 52 years old.
Mm.
We had no indication that there was anything. And one day he was here, and one day he was gone from an aneurysm. And uh, so it's been a period of grieving. And how do you do that as a leader? I decided early on I was going to embrace it and be honest with it, open with it, and I've done some Facebook posts and various things about how I'm feeling, and the Jelly Roll song "I Am Not Okay, but Everything's Going to Be All Right" has been so helpful to me because I'm not okay, but I know that everything's going to be all right. I'm better, and still have difficult, challenging days, but this practice, which I had was in the process of learning over the last few years before has helped me during the crisis of just sitting down in a place, opening my hands before me, and just saying, Father, I just need to receive your love. And, turning on some mindless music and just sitting and receiving God's love has been just an amazing, amazing thing. So I just want to vouch for that, and that's something that Chip has taught me. Anything else? Daily, weekly practices? I mean, we talk about, in the book in chapter 6 of the Endurance Factor, we talk about 4 meta skills. I don't want to go through all of them right now. We don't have time. But one of them that has been very, very helpful to me is killing your ants, which ants are automatic negative thoughts. And I could talk about a burnout season I went through early on in ministry where it was thoughts that just whipped me and really went into depression and had to learn what's called cognitive therapy now. It's sanctified psychology. It's basically Paul saying capture every thought and make it obedient. In other words, what do, Chip? We capture the thought. We question the thought. Is this really true? Does this sound like something God would say to me?
Right.
And then we replace it with the truth from God's word. And so that's something. Anything else real quick on a daily practice?
I mean, I think the main thing is kind of what you're saying. I made reference to the end of it, but Matthew 11:28-30. Come to me, all you're worried, heavy laden. I'll give you rest. Take my yoke. Learn from me. I'm meek and gentle in heart. You'll find rest for your soul. I've broken that down into 4 things. Come to me. So make sure you have some way that you're getting yourself in the presence of God. And I said it that way, not just make sure you're reading your Bible, make sure you're whatever, make sure you're getting into the presence of God, because that's where the good stuff happens, man. So come to me, take my yoke. What does that mean? One time when I was learning this, I felt like the Lord said, live on a short leash.
Hmm.
In other words, intentionally go into your day saying, Jesus, please direct every step today, every thought. I start to move in a direction, check me, because I want to learn how to live aligned with you and more, when I get ready to say something stupid, please catch me before I say it, not after. And so come to me, take my yoke, and then learn from me. What does that mean? Be a lifelong, life-wide learner. Don't be afraid to say, I get triggered by this too often. There's something I need to deal with, and figure out how to deal with it. And then, of course, the last one is find rest for your soul. If your soul's not restful, it's because there's something down there you're not dealing with.
Hmm.
And man, you can feel so much better if you take the time to deal with it.
That's so good. We could continue this conversation for another hour. We're not. We'll have other conversations in the future. But, how can churches or boards better support their leaders in this area? Let me just tackle that real quick. I believe that every church ought to have in their budget mental health care for pastors, for their pastors and other pastors. It's a crime not to do that. I really believe that, because this is what takes men and women out. The battlefield for ministry and for life is in our mind. That's where the battlefield is. That's where the enemy does battle. And I know the church in years past, you couldn't talk about these kind of things, but now you can, and we are, and hopefully we're leading a charge on that. But I think every church ought to have in their budget counseling, mental health for pastors, and I not selfishly, but I'll say selfishly, in your missions budget, I would love for every church to help organizations like Pastors Collective, pastorscollective.com/friends. There are pastors who can't afford to get what they need. There are pastors
Right.
who are in crisis today that we provide, and we do free retreats for those that can't afford it. And we're going to keep doing that and make them free. But in order to do that, we got to have help. And I wish every church would put in their budget a little bit every month to help pastors
Right.
that need help. That's some things that church boards can do. They can also, and this is a top topic for another conversation that I hope we have, put in your budget sabbaticals. Then I shouldn't even have brought it up because I got so much I want to say on it. I'm not going to say it. We'll have another conversation on that. But that's things that church boards can do and support the pastor. One last question. What gives you hope for the future of leaders in ministry? We've talked about, and we see, around us, many who have made bad choices, oftentimes because they're burned out. I think sometimes guys make bad choices to get out. It seems like the only way out. Oftentimes it's just from a clouded perspective or burnout or whatever. But what gives us hope for the future of leaders in ministry? You want to tackle that at all, Chip? Do you have hope for the future?
Yeah, I would say that this conversation and the others like it. I've changed the name of my podcast, and you see why I'm saying this, to Mental Health and the Mission of the Church. I believe, again, forgive me, but I believe the most important conversation happening in the church today is the one we're having. Because not only, like Greg, some of the things you just said, I absolutely, totally agree that let's keep pastors in the game, let's keep them healthy, et cetera, et cetera. Well, here's the deal. Let's represent Jesus better. And if we're not healthy, we're not representing Jesus well.
Mm-hmm.
Let's let the world around us see a clearer, more accurate presentation of who Jesus really is. And I don't think at times, I don't think we look much different than the leaders in the world. We're just as stressed, just as burnout, just as tired. And I don't think it's supposed to be that way. And so I think this is what gives me the most hope, that there's more and more of this slowly. Now, I do think what you said, Pastor Greg, I think we're kind of near the front of the line in driving this conversation. And we're honored. We're thrilled. But we want to see both ends of that, like I do. I want to see the mental health community and the church start learning how to talk and partner together. And it's not in a good place right now. We don't do that very well.
But there is hope.
Absolutely.
And where
Absolutely.
you mentioned a podcast. You do the mental health in the church. How can we hear that, or is there a way yet?
Well, if you go to whatever podcast source you use, just Google my name or
Okay.
search my name, and then it should show up.
Okay.
It's called Mental Health and the Mission of the Church. I also have a YouTube channel, same thing,
Okay.
same name.
Great.
And if I can, Greg, because of this being May being Mental Health Awareness Month, I did a 4-part mini series that will drop every Tuesday um, for this month, and I titled it "Shades of Grace: Exploring a Jesus-Shaped Culture." In other words, how can you create a safe place where people feel okay, even though they're not okay? Kind of what Greg said about the Jelly Roll song, which I'm shocked you said it was a Jelly Roll song, man. Come on, man.
Come on. Come on. All right. Well, listen. Thanks for being with us. Some of you hung in for the whole time. People have asked, where can you find this? It will be on Pastors Collective YouTube channel soon, and you can see it again. Share it with a friend. Share it with a spouse. We certainly appreciate y'all being a part. If this has been helpful, leave comments on that.
Right. Yeah.
We're wanting to do it more often. But anyway, that's about all I got to say. Thanks, Chip, for being involved. And
Yeah, man. Glad to.
we'll talk at y'all later.